Hi guys, welcome back. Looking back over my notes here, it's probably a good idea next year to split this up a little bit and do some romantic narration and then split off landscape as a separate day. But in the interest of time, we'll proceed with Thomas Cole and the Oxbow. Some of you are going to be familiar with this work because you've had U.S. history or will be taking it soon. And this is something that's going to tie to the idea of manifest destiny, something you'll see in American literature as well as American history. So I'm hoping that we can draw on some of your prior experience and knowledge and kind of speed the process up as we talk about this pivotal piece. But I will remove my face so we can move ahead here and use the entire screen to talk about the Oxbow. Okay. Okay, guys, so here is my presentation on Thomas Cole. I just want to mention briefly, in the old course before this transition and before so many artists were wiped out of our to-do list, um, you have to remember that this is not like the first time landscape has been something that's been considered to be expressive. We've had Dutch artists do landscape because of the affinity that they have for the landscape they have to reclaim from the ocean. It seems to have a particularly strong market or strong heyday in that regard. There are French academicians like Nicolas Poussin and Claude Lorraine who also want to extend the role that landscape plays and elevate it as an art form in that hierarchy that was really so strict and stern at this time in history. Thomas Cole is an English-born artist who comes to the U.S. and finds a ready and willing industrialist market that wants to celebrate the American wild as its new conquest. The vast amount of resources and the vast amount of natural landscape here is likened to Europe's old crowded Gothic cathedrals in being equally impressive and equally expressive. So he's able to capitalize on a perfect storm, no pun intended. The Oxbow, you guys, you have a pretty good article and a pretty good essay on both of them. But this probably should be like on your list of possible things to write about when it comes to man and nature. Usually, this gives us the opportunity to talk about landscape, expressing ideas that we have about the land that we populate. And the biggest idea that you need to remember for this, of course, would be manifest destiny. For those of you that are unfamiliar with that term, it is the idea that the conquering of America, the settling of America had always been sort of preordained, that this had been written and predicted to happen, and that it has God's approval that we do so robustly, right? It is progressive. It is the idea that man is in awe of nature, but also going to control nature. So it has many, different kinds of facets and plausibilities, but they're all addressed here in the Oxbow. The idea essentially, you've got an identifiable spot or bend in the river that's in the state of Massachusetts. To us, this looks like relatively unsettled territory in like the far west, but it's actually on the east coast. You can already see that settlements are being made on the right, but unbridled nature is not too far to the west on the left. You have basically a dichotomy between the settled land and the unsettled powers and forces of nature as a storm moves across the valley. A storm has just come and moved across the valley, so we're watching it dissipate over to the left. But it's a large work, so you have to remember the scale of this thing. We tend to kind of forget that these were all meant to be entertainment pieces for our pleasure, for our long looking. Lots of details, many of them in miniature, rendered in the landscape as well as the unbridled tree blast that you see there, the blasted tree. Essentially, you guys are probably aware that the artist is here, right? He's showing up in the artwork and placing himself in what he thinks of as his studio, nature, unbridled nature. So there is evidence of man's presence, but he is dwarfed by the nature, almost like Fan Quan in Travelers Among Mountains and Streams, right? The idea is things that stuck out in my mind. You can see writing on the hilltop here. It looks as if to be a Hebrew writing from the air, where we're basically putting God's writing on the land that we're going to conquer, and we're supposed to travel on bravely to do so. So it represents a growing country's desire for conquest and natural resources that's going to eventually end up in the settling of America coast to coast. And I wanted to show you some of his other works, just to kind of give you a sense of what he creates. Now, Cole is quite fanciful in what he constructs, using landscape and notes from his travels to create something that really essentially doesn't exist. You have the story of a good knight who's going off on an epic quest, as most heroes tend to do. It's called The Departure. And we see the castle far off in the background and golden light on everything that it touches. We see his return here, a bit more somber, as he's come back now injured. He's being carried back on a bier to the cathedral, the Gothic cathedral, for Christ and country. He has sacrificed everything, but it's almost a small little story in the wider expanse of nature that you see here. So really, Cole is emphasizing man is small compared to the vastness of nature. Here we have a religious scene, the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the garden. And again, the storming masses, the wind, the howling fire that we see, those dwarf our figures here in a rather unwelcoming kind of environment. This really gets at the idea of the sublime, I think, that they were trying to mention in the video. We are simultaneously drawn in at the beauty of nature, but overwhelmed at its danger and its scary qualities. I mean, it could completely overwhelm us at times, and we're meant to kind of get lost in the darkness of that nature. That is the art of the sublime, and we'll see it again when we talk about J.M.W. Turner later. But here is the scene from The Last of the Mohicans. The idea of the noble savage at peace in his wilderness is something that's attractive and fanciful for the romantics of this time period. Romantic landscape then would do exactly the same thing by casting these great stories of the American wilderness as entertainment for people in cities that are already becoming too crowded. Here you have, again, landscape being used to convey an idea, the ages of man. We have a small child you can barely make out in the boat who's being protected by an angel here. He's emerging into the world, which is full of greenery and detail. Here's the Ages of Man youth, where he goes off on his quest. The angel stays behind, and he goes off looking for castles in the sky. It looks kind of like the Taj Mahal there. Here in old age, the angel returns to the male, who is now pondering the end of his life and looking up to an illuminated sky that seems to be kind of a portal to the great beyond. These are all the allegorical stories for great big ideas that humans think about, now being expressed in the form of landscape. His most notable series in that fashion was The Course of Empire, and I wanted to show you this was his sketch to present them as a series in the home of an industrialist. Basically, he takes the story of Rome's rise and fall, and he creates these dramatic panoramic views of a vast wilderness that has to be subdued. So here we start the series. You can see man is beginning in a pastoral kind of state. Eventually, that will become urbanized and quite civilized, but then in the arc of history, that empire will fall. Later in the history, you see the great empire basically in ruin. So it's a series that gives landscape a heavy role to play. something that would appeal to the industrialists who are building railroads and trying to secure as many natural resources as they can from this unbridled West. So that's really where the Oxbow fits in. As far as the settlement goes, you guys can see this really is a balance of two different opposing ideas. So just like in his larger series, The Course of Empire, in the Oxbow, we see landscape playing as equally powerful a role. I'm going to cut it short there since we have a few more videos to take a look at. I will let you take a short little break and meet you back here for the next landscape artist.